hello. Fancy seeing you here. So on Thursday, you will be doing a close reading exercise, probably in groups of 3, related to Hannah Nicole Jones's Introduction to the 1619 Project. So in preparation for that, I wanted to give you a brief commentary on the idea of close reading, first of all, and then also a short demo of the same exercise that you'll be doing, except I've done it on my own with a completely different text altogether, which we'll get into in a couple of minutes. But first of all, so this term close reading, it seems to be kind of thrown around a lot without ever really being accompanied by an explanation of what it actually means. First of all, the term close reading really grew out of this movement in literary criticism called New Criticism. And New Criticism represents this shift in focus from analyzing a text by the time in which it was written, the historical context that surrounds it, and the life of the author who wrote it. Instead, the focus shifted to a deep analysis of the words on the page. And it was largely concerned with poetry, and the proponents of this new criticism put forward this idea that what made a work of poetry or literature in general great was this idea of organic unity, meaning that the parts, each part grew out of each, and it was the sort of form, the words together on the page, that determined the quality of a poem or other work of literature. But now it seems like it's just kind of thrown around a lot with this expectation that it's some kind of self-explanatory term. But what does it actually mean? Well, for our purposes here, the way we're going to use the term close reading in this class is by asking 3 questions of a text. When we talk about close reading, it means to ask these 3 questions. The first, what is the text saying? What is it saying on its surface? What is its direct, overt message? Because if you are not comprehending the surface message, then nothing else, you can't answer anything else about the text if you don't understand where it's anchored in, where the meaning of the text is anchored. Right, so when you hear me in the future talk about, if an argument follows, if it's a valid argument, follows logically from the text, what I mean by that is its validity is determined by its understanding of the direct and surface meaning of the textual evidence. So that's kind of a mouthful, but it really just means, what is the text trying to say consciously and directly on its surface? Then the next question we could ask is, how is the text written? Right. So this is when we start to get into terms of this is when we start to get into ideas of language, structure, different elements of text, different what's called like tropes, where we can start talking about metaphors and symbolism, the syntax of a text. Why are the sentences arranged the way? Why are the words arranged they are? Why are the words arranged the way they are in the sentences? And so on and so forth. So there's lots of different ways we can answer this question of how is the text written. And finally, we can ask why. Why is the text written? And that can go in a lot of different directions. And with that question, one direction we could go in is talking about the intentions of the author, the historical context in which the text was written, what framed the text, what's historical situation, what are the historical circumstances that gave rise to the text. We can ask what fundamental human drives account for this work of literature. What is the, even removed from historical context or author motivation, we can ask what is the subtext, what's hidden beneath the surface that even the author might not be aware of, and it might even transcend temporal circumstances, that is the circumstances of the time in which it was written. So again, it can go off in a lot of different directions. So that's what we want to start exploring. What the text is saying on its surface, how it is saying it, and why. And we can start to combine those as well. We can ask, why is it saying it the way that it is, and so on and so forth. But that's it. What, how, and why. Those are the main questions in this class that we're going to focus on. But for now, I want to give you a short demo of the exercise that you'll be doing. So you'll be working with the introduction to the 1619 project, right? And what you're going to do with probably your two partners, I think I'm going to do groups of 3 for this. You will have to select one paragraph from Nikole Hannah-Jones's essay and answer the following questions. All right, so for the paragraph that you choose with your partners from Nikole Hannah-Jones's introduction to the 1619 project, through discussion, you will have to answer these 5 questions, or at least try to in the time allotted. So a couple of quick notes. I did this by myself with ample time. The amount of time that you have to do this will be somewhat determined by how much time we spend talking about your first paper, which we will spend as much time on as we need to, but the rest of the class will be devoted to this. So I had lots of time. I tried to rush a little bit, to give you a bit more of an authentic example, but I had plenty of time to formulate my thoughts, maybe a little bit more, but you'll be getting these in advance, so you'll have a little bit of time to start thinking about them. The other thing is I did this by myself, so my answers are going to reflect my interpretation solely. Whereas when you do this with your partners, your answer should reflect input from all 3 of you, and it might reflect disagreement amongst you, right? So I'm in full agreement with myself, so my answers don't reflect any different interpretations. I'm interpreting it the way that I am, but when you do this, your answers might have 2 or 3 interpretations, or you might all be in full agreement, and it'll just have one interpretation that you've all agreed upon. But it should reflect. Anytime we do something like this, the answers that you put down should reflect discourse. They should reflect dialogue, conversation, discussion. Even if you don't come to a point of agreement, you've discussed it, and that's what matters with these activities more than anything else. So I think what we'll do for this, we'll go through the questions one by one and answer them as we go. Or I'll give you the answer that I put as. So the text that I did this for is a very different one from what you'll be using, obviously. This is from an essay called Letting Go by David Sedaris, who I mentioned in another video. If you've never heard of him, he's kind of a humorist. He's written a lot for like the New Yorker, stuff like that. He got his start on This American Life on NPR. And he's kind of a memoirist, essayist, that sort of thing. Mainly short pieces. And I like him. He's somebody I enjoy. I respect him as a writer. So you'll see that my answers aren't really challenging his methods per se. They're more validating his efforts. But you don't have to do that. You can disagree with the text. And as we get to more text in the future, you might find me disagreeing with some of the text. So it is perfectly fine to disagree and challenge a text and challenge the way a text is operating. I didn't really challenge this one so much. I just explored how it was operating and kind of, I guess, validated its quality, really. So I chose my paragraph. You'll choose a paragraph from the 16:9 project, but for this example, I've chosen a paragraph from David Sedaris's Letting Go, which is this piece about his it's kind of reflections on, it's basically a reflection on quitting smoking. That's how you might look at it. So I'll read you the paragraph that I answered these questions for. In this paragraph, he is remembering the first cigarette he ever really enjoyed. It was in a little store a block from our hotel that I bought my first pack of cigarettes. The ones I'd smoked earlier had been Ronnie's, Pall Malls, I think. And though they tasted no better or worse than I thought they would, I felt that in the name of individuality, I should find my own brand, something separate, something me. Carlton's, Kent's, Alpine's. It was like choosing a religion. For weren't Vantage people fundamentally different from those who'd taken Darks or Newports? What I didn't realize was that you could convert, that you were allowed to. The Kent person could, with very little effort, become a Vantage person, though it was harder to go from menthol to regular, or from regular size to ultra long. All rules had their exceptions, but the way I came to see things, they generally went like this. Cools and Newports were for black people and lower class whites. Camels were for procrastinators, those who wrote bad poetry, and those who put off writing bad poetry. Merits were for sex addicts, Salems for alcoholics, and Moors for people who considered themselves to be outrageous but really weren't. One should never lend money to a Marlboro menthol smoker, though you could usually count on a regular Marlboro person to pay you back. The eventual subclasses of milds, lights, and ultralights not only threw a wrench in the works, but made it nearly impossible for anyone to keep your brand straight. All that, however, came later, along with warning labels and American spirits. Right, so then I picked my paragraph, I read it a few times, thought it over, and I set out answering these questions. So the first question, to guide you in your discussion about the paragraph that you choose with your group, is what emotions might this passage elicit from its readers? Are the emotions you experience reading it the same as those that the author intended for you to feel? Why does it make you feel this way? Is it the content, the way it's written, or some combination of style and substance? So often when you're reading a text, the way to get into it is to find the points that give you a strong emotional response of some kind, of any kind. You know, the first step to close reading is to find your entry. Find your entryway into the text. Find where you connect to it. And find where, by finding where you connect, you can start to build a better understanding of the rest of the text. So you'll see also that I've indicated the paragraph that I chose. And my answer for this question was, I, for one, thought this was a particularly funny paragraph. That was the emotion that I got out of it. I think it might resonate more with smokers or former smokers, but the idea of connecting identity to brands is pretty relatable, especially for Americans. I think it's like basketball shoes. As a former smoker, this passage also kind of made me really want a cigarette. I've read Sedaris before, so I'm not surprised that this made me laugh. He's known as a humorist, so that was definitely his intention. Part of the reason that this made me want a cigarette is that it is about smoking connected to a certain memory. And so I started to remember things and get nostalgic. I think Sedaris wanted to provoke this emotion too. It correlates with other parts of the essay that show the tension between doing something that we know is bad for us, but also still sort of loving that thing. And it's kind of absurd. So you'll see that I'm not going really too deep. I'm just making notes of my thoughts. I'm making notes of the thoughts and feelings that are arising in response to this paragraph in this text. You know, if I was going to write a paper about this, I would go a lot deeper into these things. But right now, I'm just kind of cataloging my thoughts. I'm setting up kind of coordinates of where I can begin to really dive in. I think that's a good way to think about it. Is what are your coordinates? What are your coordinates of entry? One way to find those coordinates of where you can enter the text is by finding points in the text that give you a certain strong emotional reaction before you even start getting into interpretation and all. So you'll see that I've also made notes. It's like basketball shoes. It's just kind of a passing thought. I'm not going to go too deep into that right now because if this is an exercise, then I just simply don't have the time to, go into a full analysis of that. But it's something, if I wanted to come back to it, I could write about in a fuller paper with more argumentation and so on and so forth. So the second question is, whatever emotions this paragraph prompts, is making the reader feel something its main concern? Is the primary motive of this paragraph to stir up emotion, or is it to convey factual information and or explain something? Does the paragraph assume that you know its subject already and is trying to affect your interpretation and or opinion of its subject? Or does it assume that you don't know about its subject and is trying to teach you something in terms of hard facts? So really, these questions were designed with the 1619 project in mind. So that would be a little bit more, there will be more variation in your answers to that question than I think I could have come up with here. But nonetheless, I've answered it in relation to this paragraph. And I said this paragraph isn't really trying to convey factual information. It's not trying to explain to me a certain event in history. It's not trying to explain, some kind of scientific process or expound upon some important specific cultural event. But it is exploring cultural conceptions, we might say. So this paragraph isn't really trying to convey factual information, and even though it's supposed to make the reader laugh, and it does make the reader laugh, or at least it made me laugh, there seems to be an underlying message about the shallowness of stereotypes, right? So this is what I mean when I said like cultural concepts, but it's not really a specific thing. Even though there's specific details, it's not referring to a specific event or a specific person. There seems to be an underlying message about the shallowness of stereotypes and how easily we can develop perceptions about people in connection to things that don't really define their character in any way except through marketing, etc. People do use things like cigarettes as identity signifiers. So you can see, again, these thoughts aren't fully developed. I'm just marking them down, mapping them out, putting down kind of road signs, as it were, to pathways of thought that I can follow later if I wanted to come back and develop them. I would say the paragraph assumes the reader has some familiarity with cigarette advertising. It's making some sort of, it's at least assuming that the reader has some idea of certain characters representing certain types of cigarettes. I would say the paragraph assumes the reader has some familiarity with cigarette advertising and branded advertising, but it focuses our attention on just how effective this really can be. All right, so even though it's assuming that the reader has some idea of different character types being represented and representing different brands, it's drawing that out and forcing us to really think about that, and it's doing it through humor, but also underneath the humor. So the third question or task, so select a sentence from this paragraph and rewrite it using different words. Does changing the words change the meaning of the sentence? In what ways? Why might the author have chosen to write it using the particular words they did, instead of using different words such as those with which you rewrote it? So I picked a single sentence out of this paragraph. I copied and pasted it from the text. What I didn't realize was that you could convert, that you were allowed to. And then I rewrote the sentence in my own words, trying to say the same thing, but using different words. I said, what I didn't know was that it was okay if a person switched brands. And then I reflected on this alteration. And I said, in this case, changing the words definitely alters the sentiment of this sentence. Some part of the point of this paragraph, since part of the point of this paragraph to draw the reader into a certain feeling, using you, the pronoun you, personalizes it. Using the word convert not only ties it to the religion simile from the previous sentence. If you recall, in the text it said choosing a cigarette brand is like choosing a religion. So this is carrying that comparison forward. Using the word convert not only ties it to the religion simile from the previous sentence, it reinforces how much weight is attached to cigarette brand choice. Saying something like switched doesn't carry the same association of making a heavy lifestyle choice. So it's reinforcing that kind of connection between brands and identity. And also saying that you were allowed to adds to the feeling that the brand choice is seen by everyone and possibly policed, or at least can lead to harsh judgment from certain quarters if you choose the wrong one. And finally, so you'll have 5 questions, but I only answered 4 because the 5th question is very directly related to Hannah Nicole Jones's essay in particular, which you can read right there. But the final question I answered for this demo was, look at the paragraph immediately before and immediately after the one you have chosen. How does this middle paragraph connect the other 2? Does it connect them effectively? Do these 3 paragraphs serve the same purpose? That is, are all 3 of these paragraphs trying to convey factual information, stir emotions, or argue an interpretation of evidence presented? So basically, are they all part of the same line of thought? Are they jointly working towards some combination of these aims? So are they all united in the same line of thought, but each path with a different name towards the same goal, towards the same argument, you might say, or even sub-argument? Or are they attempting to do something not described here? So the 3 paragraphs that I chose are all sort of part of the same anecdote. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go back and read all 3 paragraphs, but just take my word for it. These 3 paragraphs are all part of the same anecdote, so they pretty much all serve the same purpose. That is, they're telling the different stages of this short sort of story, this anecdote. And the middle paragraph, though, I noticed this is the one that I chose that was my main focus. And this paragraph, it's interesting that Siddhartha sort of steps outside of the thread of the narrative. So he's sort of reflecting on the action of the narrative, reflecting on his decisions. And this is something you'll want to note of. This sort of operation is what you want to try to do to some degree when you write your personal narratives. But he's sort of reflecting on the act. He's reflecting on his own decisions at the time, his own memories. He's reflecting on them and in the present. And so he steps outside the thread of the narrative, and it seems more focused on a kind of reflection than the paragraph before and the paragraph after, which are more largely concerned with just tailoring the action of the story. But the paragraph after nails home the absurdity of using a brand to establish your identity. When he talks about how the Viceroy, that's his brand of cigarette, will somehow override his beret and silly pants to make him seem more masculine. So the point of that is he's wearing these what would not be considered tough guy clothes, but he somehow thinks that smoking this particular cigarette will convey from him an air of toughness and masculinity that will somehow be contrast against his clothes that he's wearing. So again, and then there's one more question that you'll have to answer. So I post these questions. I'll post my sample in the folder, and then I will also post a set of unanswered questions for you to refer to and have with you on Thursday when you go to do this in your groups in reference to Nicole Hannah-Jones's introduction to the 1619 project. And I will also post instructions with those questions. So more than just the questions, instructions as well.